Welcome to Shorty SuperCoach and welcome to the third and final JLT wrap. Well, we've seen all that we need to see really. All the games are done and dusted, practice game style. There'll probably be a couple of others over the weekend in terms of state league matches. We'll get a bit of a chance to see some players that we might want to check in with, but pretty much it's all there for us to dissect now. And unfortunately, as always seems to be the case, we've still got a few questions that we wished we were maybe a little clearer on. But as always, I've got a few names that I want to walk through and have a discussion about. Plenty of matches, plenty of players' names, still plenty of questions. I don't know about you, but I'm tinkering. I try not to. I've been trying to just stay nice and focused on a few players. My core lineup hasn't changed. Just probably a spot or two in the defence and the forward line. Has just seen a couple of different names roll through it as I look for the perfect balance. But look, anyway, we'll start with Richmond and North Melbourne, where the Tigers got the job done very easily, 70-point winners. And look, Toby Nankervis was extremely impressive. 21 touches, 17 hit-outs, 7 tackles, 5 clearances. He's definitely in the Grundy, Stephen Martin mould where they just rack up a lot of touches and really just that on-the-deck midfielder type ruckman. But you'd be pretty bold to pick him. I know he's in a few sides, I think maybe 4 or 5% of teams, but I wouldn't be endorsing him. But he's certainly going to be a player that we consider more and more year upon year as he matures into that role. Showed some really good signs last year, as we know. Brandon Ellis, 17 touches, 4 rebound 50s. He's probably not doing enough, I must say. I think entering pre-season, he came under that mould of, if we're going to pick him, we need to see a little bit of encouragement just to give that confidence to us from some practice games, and we didn't really see it. So I think he would probably be one that we just wait and see how he goes. Josh Caddy, dare I say it. Now, I'm not endorsing him, but just for a bit of a laugh, we can reminisce about last season when he burnt me to shreds. 20 touches, 12 contested, 7 clearances. That backed up an extremely good JLT match. The first one, he was very good in that too. So he's in some really good form, but I still couldn't see myself or anyone picking him, particularly after he destroyed me last year. Moving on to North Melbourne, Marley Williams, 22 touches, 9 rebound 50s, 5 tackles. At 396k in the back line, he can't be overlooked. I think he certainly should be one that you keep on your list if you're in a draft league with a few mates, because he could be a nice sleeper that some people don't quite get on board early, and I think he could be a handy pickup. In terms of SuperCoach Classic, not sure. I think there's a few types around that 380 to 450 mark that we should consider. He's one. He's probably not my first picked. I think Pierce Hanley getting an injury over the weekend may have people thinking for replacements and possibly a cheaper option. So he's food for thought. I think he's going to be a strong rebounder for the Roos. Todd Goldstein, 8 touches, 16 hit-outs. Bruce had the 15 hit-outs. And look, I couldn't see him being a viable option now. I think we needed to really see how he went and how that ruck dynamic worked for North Melbourne, and it's a bit too much of a share for me. I think Goldstein is getting a bit old now too. He's certainly not in his prime, but I thought, well, maybe if he could just get back to that solo ruck, then maybe we'd see some really solid numbers, but it's a bit risky for mine. Luke Davies-Uniacke, just the 16 touches, okay without being good. I must say I didn't see the game live, but I think probably he hasn't set the world on fire, and perhaps some people might now be looking for a slightly cheaper option, you know, or even a Brayshaw type, or maybe someone else in that higher, more expensive midfield echelon. And I think probably Davies-Uniacke has been popular, but there's got to be reason, along with Paddy Dow, that maybe we should look elsewhere, because there are some pretty good options about. Mitch Hibberd had the 11 touches from just 48% time on ground, and he's at 169k, and we've got plenty of options rolling through that back line around that sort of a range. And I think if he's named round 1, then he's got to be considered. It's always handy to have a look at a guy who isn't playing his first season. You know, he's had a bit of a go, he's seen what it's about, been in the system for a little bit, and I think those guys, granted they can get in the team and have reasonable job security, can be slightly safer than maybe a debutant. But look, we'll see how North Melbourne's round 1 team rolls out. Melbourne and St Kilda, the D's getting the job done by 26 points after St Kilda hit back to get very close at three-quarter time. The D's kicking away in the final term. And there's plenty of names here. Some of these games, you go through the stats and the list and you're like, there's not much going on here, maybe a handful. And then sometimes you get about a dozen. And this is one of the real big ones that there was a lot of interest for myself in this game. And certainly, I think the wider SuperCoach community. Max Gawn, need I even mention him, just dominated. 43 hit-outs, 12 contested touches from his 18, 5 clearances. He's just as much of a lock as you could even think of. Angus Brayshaw, 19 touches, 3 clearances, 5 tackles. Again, he keeps pushing his name up for selection, and I think he's got to be in that consideration. I mean, he's around that sort of talk where we're speaking Marley Williams, as I mentioned before, and he's got to be in that mix. It's got to be in that mix. As does Christian Salem, had the 16 touches, 8 contested, 6 clearances. Maybe didn't use it as well as maybe he can, but I liked what I saw. As you guys know, he's in my team, and I just wanted to not even see him play a good game, just see that he was in the position that he could. I think sometimes we can look at stats, and it's so important to have watched the game if it comes down to this sort of positional choice. And while Salem may have not had his best game of all time, he attended many centre bounces and stoppages around the ground, and that's all I was looking for, because they've only got 2 chances to impress us over the JLT, and sometimes a guy's just not going to have a great day. Doesn't mean we should write him off. Sometimes it's more important to see, well, okay, he only had 17, 18 touches, but he had the opportunity to win more. They're giving him that time through the midfield. That's what I'm after, because we got to look for body of work. We're not just looking for 2 great games and then they're in our side, and vice versa. Just if they have poor JLT matches doesn't mean they get booted out. But if we can see what we're after, and often we are looking for more midfield time for a lot of our probably forward and backline selections at times, and I think I saw that from Salem. Christian Petrarca, I definitely saw it from him. He was outstanding. 23 touches, 15 contested, 7 clearances. Absolute lock. Of course, Jack Viney's a man that will return to that Melbourne midfield, but I don't see him just pushing these guys out. Clearly, they'll get a little bit less time, but I think Petrarca in particular, Salem for sure, definitely guys that Melbourne want in that midfield, and I loved what I saw there. Bailey Frisch, obviously another guy who has been well in contention for a forward line spot in a round 1 debut for Melbourne. 12 touches, I think he kicked a goal, 64% time on ground, and look, he's got to be in the mix. As we know, it's pretty slim pickings up forward in our rookie stakes, and he is looking like a really good option for us, so we'll need him. I hope he gets named round 1. On to the Saints, and Shane Savage is probably one of those guys that there's always a few that have really good pre-seasons. They're tempting guys, players we've had on that potential fantasy radar for a number of years. 27 touches, 5 rebound 50s, 20 kicks, and just 7 handballs, 4 tackles. He's only in 6% of sides at 47 or 479k, I should say. And look, he must be considered as well. I think, as I've mentioned in a number of videos, the backline's tough. It always is. There isn't necessarily a lot of guys we can absolutely bank on. Doherty's out. Shaw's not the man he was. There's a lot of players like Zach Williams also out. So maybe we've got to look for these new guys who are the next generation type. And Savage certainly seems like a fella who is going to have a very good season. I think he's definitely one to consider. He's not in my side at the moment, but if he's in yours, I don't blame you. I think he could be a reasonable selection, and certainly a guy that seems to be one of the prime movers out of defence for St Kilda. And clearly that's a guy we want in our side, the one that the club wants the ball in their hands, to be the distributor, and he's a kicker. I mean, that's always a dead giveaway when you see a guy getting the ball, hitting targets with the foot. I mean, clearly that's what the club and the side wants him doing. Give it to Shane Savage, because he's our man to move it out of the back line, one of their better ball users. Jack Billings also saw what I needed to see. Clearly I brought him back into my side because I do have a slight man crush on him and he's flying, and he really did do exactly what I wanted. 24 touches, was named St Kilda's best, and any concern that his body maybe isn't quite up to it after doing that hamstring was ruled out. I was really pleased with what I saw. Jack Stevens obviously hurt the ankle, but he was flying. 19 touches from half the game. He was on song, and by all reports should be right for round 1, but it is concerning when you cop an injury just so late. It is concerning, so close to round 1. If it was me personally, honestly, I haven't considered Stephen at any stage this season, but I think if you had him or were thinking about him, this must just about put a line through it, I think, because to go in under a slight injury cloud is just something I personally always want to be avoiding. Blake Acres. There's a left field name, but I know myself I'm searching for a little bit of depth in the forward line because there's not many rookies there, and the ones that are on offer really have that forward pocket 8 to 10 touches, 1 goal feel about them. Just blokes who are going to sort of average your 40 to 5, sort of 50 points per game. Who am I trying to think of? Jared Pickett, I think it was last year. They've got a lot of that vibe about them. Get games, but they're really going nowhere in terms of price because they're just not getting the scores. So I'm looking for depth, and Acres is a guy who's a bit left field. I'm not going to be putting him in my side, but if you're a guy that's having a look at him, well, I can understand why. He had the 28 touches, 11 contested, and he is a midfield forward. So I think he's a guy who offers versatility, has been talked about as a potential breakout contender at times at St Kilda, and I think he's a player that we should certainly put on the radar. As I said, in terms of draft, could be a good one that some of your mates might not be aware of. David Armitage, 16 touches from 65% time on ground. Again, he was solid. I think a lot of people will be starting with him. And look, I've said my thoughts on him. I think there's better options. I don't like mid-prices in the midfield. That's fair enough. But his 2 JLT matches have probably done enough. If you wanted him, he's probably done enough to prove to you that he's good enough in your eyes if you've been looking at him. And Nick Caulfield, 17 touches. I really like him. Very much a good rebounder, was through his under 18 days, and he seems to be translating that pretty nicely to the top level. Clearly it's not going to be as easy and a bit more pressure in the real stuff, but he seems to have what it takes and seems to be looking the goods. He'll be in many people's sides. I mean, we're predicting he's going to be named round 1, but it seems fairly likely. Flip the page over here to Sydney and the Giants. The Swans getting the job done by 11 points. Luke Parker and Josh Kennedy did what they do. Plenty of touches, plenty contested, plenty of clearances, and look, I think both guys will be in a few teams, and fair enough, they're clearly prime movers through the midfield. For the Swans, Isaac Heaney, 19 touches, 5 tackles. Slight bit of concern after his first hit out from a few people. As you know, I wasn't too concerned, and he seemed to just build nicely. It's been a slow pre-season, but I think he's just got to be a lock in our sides. We need to be fielding premiums in our forward line, so I mean, clearly he's a guy we're going to want at some point in the season. And the way the forward line is setting up and shaping up with options, I think you've just got to pick him, even if he's a little slightly underdone. But as we saw last year, we saw him return from, was it glandular fever he had last year, I think? Return him in like round 5. I think he averaged 3 figures for the first month, maybe even 5 weeks. He produced maybe 3 or 4 tonnes. So clearly shows that he maybe doesn't even need a fantastic pre-season to look the goods. Who else have we got here? Jake Lloyd, 21 touches, 5 rebound, 50, 62% time on ground. I'm a big fan of him, obviously. I can understand why some wouldn't, if my only concern is maybe not a big enough ceiling. But like I was saying about Savage, Lloyd's definitely the man out of the back line that the Swans want to be distributing the ball, and I like that. Darcy Cameron, 63% time on ground. And look, he didn't set the world on fire by any means, but I think clearly with Naismith going down, he's a guy that really looks assured to be playing in the ruck for the Swans. R3 is a bit of a no-brainer if he is named. Robbie Fox, just a bit of a left field one. He's only in 2% of sides, but 18 touches. He's at 232k. He's someone that you might just want to think about. He's shown signs that he can produce reasonable numbers. Played a little bit last year. It's a bit left field, but sometimes it's nice to throw in a few names that maybe you haven't thought about and give a bit of food for thought. I wouldn't be going with him, but I've just seen a little bit of talk about him, and clearly he's a guy who might be pushing for a spot in the Swans starting 22. On to the Giants, Stephen Cornelio, 27 touches, only 5 contested. Normally his numbers are a bit closer to 50-50 in the contested and uncontested, but not to worry. 4 clearances and the 5 inside 50s. He's been pretty good. I must say. Clearly my player profile, if you had a look at it, I didn't endorse him. I felt he was a bit sort of no man's land, a bit in between the net and the baseline. You sort of find yourself at that service line in the game of tennis and you're really nowhere, and that's where I sort of feel Cornelio was at in terms of price, given he's in that midfield. Obviously, if you're picking him, you believe he can definitely go 105 plus and be a guy you hold on to for a long time. I can understand the thinking behind that. Just not for me and how I've structured up. Toby Green, 16 touches, only one of those contested, but look, he only played 48% time on ground. Had a bit of a toe concern throughout the pre-season, so he's had a limited preparation, but came back in really good touch. I've just got something about Toby Green that I just can't get on board with, and it's nothing but, it's not because he kicks blokes in the head and things like. It's nothing to do with any of the memes and all that sort of stuff where he gets a bit of a bad rap. I just don't know whether I can trust him enough week to week. I'm not sure. I just wish he got a little bit more midfield time and maybe just more rotation. I know he plays that half-forward role, link man, extremely well, but I just like Billings and Wingard a little bit more than Toby Green, and they're about the same price, give or take 10k. So that's where I'm at with him. But look, if you go with him, he will be a point of difference, that's for sure. Lockie Keefe, 14 touches, went at 93% disposal efficiency, and he was only on the ground for 45%. So again, he's put his hand up. I didn't see all of this game, but statistically, it looked like he went all right. Could be someone who might be putting their hand up for round one. And Jeremy Finlayson, I always seem to struggle my way through that name, but 12 touches, 83% time on ground, and he'll be in the mix. We can get him in the midfield or the back line, so he's someone to keep an eye on. But like Keefe and Finlayson, clearly their SuperCoach selections will be dependent on that GWS round one side. And Brett Deledio, 8 touches from 61% time on ground. A little bit of talk about him, can he get back to close to his best? Could be a handy selection for D5. You got to put a line through him. There's so much risk. We needed to see him play some really good footy. The body's a massive concern. And if we're not seeing good football at the moment, well, we just cannot be picking him. So that performance certainly was one that anyone who was dreaming about a Deledio return and maybe having a bit of a bargain player in our forward line, well, I'm not so sure. Collingwood and the Bulldogs, the Pies really stormed home to win by 33 points, and it was led by Adam Treloar. 557k. Now, he dominated 32 touches, 20 contested, 13 clearances, 14 tackles. Enormous numbers. But again, it was a similar story with that disposal efficiency that we know is a bit of a concern. That was sitting at 59. And look, I think if you're after someone who is capable of going 110, but you don't want to pay the price tag, I think Treloar could be your man. Now, as I said, 557k. He's shown that he can go 105 plus quite easily, and if my memory serves me correct, 111 average he did produce a couple of years back. He's underpriced after a tough season last year. Wasn't at his best, a few niggles, and certainly didn't use the ball as well he would have liked. I mean, that's the big question mark. SuperCoach loves good ball users. He's not the best by foot, so that's something to be wary of. But if he does produce enormous numbers in those other categories, could be worth a punt. Brodie Grundy, as you know, I'll be looking at this one very closely, and slight concern for me. Grundy's been on my side for quite a few weeks now, pretty much since Nick Nat left my side. It's been Grundy, and a little concerning. 37 hitouts, which is great, but Mason Cox kicked the 4 goals and also had 19 hitouts. Now, how does the gold sack ACL impact that? I'm not sure, but there definitely is a sharing of the ruck. How much, I'm not sure. I definitely felt that Cox wouldn't get the sort of 19 hitouts. I mean, I didn't absolutely watch this game super close. It was on in the background. But just by the numbers, I'm somewhat concerned. I think I'm just going to have a bit of a think about it and see what I'll go. But look, I think probably a guy like Stephen Martin, who maybe doesn't have that sort of a player in the lineup. Archie Smith is probably the guy who could impact that, but he didn't play on the weekend. He played Neefel, so, they're only 5 or 6k difference. So it's food for thought, and I know we love to have our ruckmen being solo rucks because that gives them the most opportunity to dominate and get as many points as possible. I just am slightly concerned that Grundy will still average great numbers, but will they be as good as he can get? Well, will Cox just sometimes have a few days where he is really playing well and just by rotations or stages in the game? You know how games can pan out sometimes. Just depending on the day, one guy can slightly get a little bit more time in the midfield or in the ruck department. I'm just a little bit concerned by that split of numbers, but I'll have to have a bit of a read up and have a bit of a think about it. Scotty Pendlebury, 12 touches from just 50% time on ground. Really good, uses the ball so well, as we know, and he's a guy that I think a lot of people will be looking to go for the next generation in terms of Neil, Merritt, Crouch and the like, but you know, you could definitely get away with picking a Josh Kennedy, a Joel Selwood or a Scott Pendlebury. You know, guys who've been Warriors for so long. Certainly guys who can still get the job done, but clearly every year they go on is a year closer to them sort of dropping away in numbers. So it's just a bit of a balancing act. As far as the Dogs went, Tom Liberatore, 28 touches, 16 contested, 7 clearances. A real throwback to his big midfield numbers, but I could not see anyone really picking him because there's an enormous amount of risk with going for Liver, just as we know. That Doggies forward line, they love to go with the smalls. He's played there at times. They love his forward line pressure. I know he's great inside, but there's got to be a question mark over where he plays for the whole season. So it's something we've got to take a look at. Clearly, not to mention that it is extremely awkward price tag through that midfield. But, you know, sometimes people like talking about the left field options, and he's certainly one to maybe keep in mind for a later selection through the draft if you're taking a bit of a league on with your mates there as well. Lukey Dalhouse keeps producing real solid, reasonable numbers. It hasn't been enough to sway me back to him. As you know, I was on board him at certain stages, now opted more for your Petrarcas, your Billings, your Wingards, etc. But, you know, his numbers are solid. I think we're going to see a decent average. It'll be 90 plus, but exactly identifying where in the 90s or even hundreds if you want to get really excited about him. I don't think he will average 3 figures, but I think it'll be in the 90s, and putting your finger on whether it's 91 or 97 could be the difference for that being a good selection, a bad selection. I think he's a guy who's a bit more workmanlike than, say, a Billings and a Wingard. They're a bit more flashy, your match winners, can kick more goals. Dalhouse is more your tackling machine, pressure, handballs in from under the pack. That's where his sort of blueprint is. Will he get enough time to show that? I know, like I said with Liver, there's a lot of guys that they're rotating through, and there's still a little bit up in the air in terms of a lot of the Bulldogs set up around the ball. So it's just got me not concerned. I think he'll be a good, solid pick. Whether it'll be enough to warrant him as a selection from round 1, probably another question. Marcus Bontempelli had 20, kicked 3. Looking good. Toby McLean, 26 touches, just a couple of clearances, but he's another guy who's rolling through that midfield. Again, I think the same line of thinking with much of these Dogs. I reckon when we pick players, you really want to know their position quite simply what it'll be each week, and I just feel like we don't quite know. I'm sure some of you Doggies fans out there know exactly, but, you know, for a bloke who doesn't watch them week in, week out and hasn't dissected their lineup, from an outsider looking in, it just seems as if on any given week, some may play forward a little bit more, and depending on the rotation and how they want to structure up against a certain side. Whereas you look at other teams and you go, well, Josh Kennedy, Luke Parker, they're going to be in the midfield. That's a no-brainer. You know, sometimes teams just have much more of a cemented first 2, 3 or 4 players that'll always basically be around the ball and sometimes rest forward. I think the Doggies have a long list of those sort of medium-sized players who will rotate and rotate and rotate. And look, it makes it tough to predict an average, I guess. So that's probably something we've got to think about. Aaron Norton, of course, a high draft pick. He had 13 touches, 8 marks, 3 contested, and he's loving the intercept work. And I think that's something that we're going to love as well. I mean, clearly, what's he at? 166, I think he's priced at. He'll be in many teams. He looks to have taken the role of Dale Morris and even Easton Wood, who's moved forward. You know, he seems to be really reading the play extremely well, and I think he'll be in a lot of teams. We've got plenty of options in that back line in terms of the rookies, and he's one of them. Port Adelaide versus Adelaide. Port Adelaide getting the job done there in the end. Jack Watts putting the 6 goals. Just thought I'd mention that. We're clearly not going to pick him, but the 6 goals from Wattsy absolutely gets people talking, that's for sure. Chad Wingard, 15 touches, couple of goals, 44% time on ground. All I needed to see, he's another guy who hasn't had a perfect pre-season, but I really like what he brings to the table, and he'll be in my side. Really enjoyed what he delivered. Don Barry, 15 touches, 7 contested. I think he'll be in the mix, certainly for us, but, you know, Port Adelaide, they bat pretty deep. They've got a pretty good side. He looks like he'll be in that round 1 team, but I'm not sure we can absolutely sit here and guarantee it. But I think if he can get a game, if he can be named, he's the sort of guy who can score pretty well too. So that'll be great. Hopefully he can be named round 1. Adelaide, well, it was Darcy Fogarty, wasn't it? 14 touches, 8 marks, kicked the 3 goals. And gee, did we need that. He's at about 156, I think it is, in our forward line. And we absolutely needed that. Someone in that rookie domain in our forward line to just get on board and give us a bit of safety. By no means is he selected yet, but gee whiz, he couldn't have done much more. He was fantastic, particularly in that first half. And he's about 192 centimetres, capable of going through the midfield, so he's not just some key forward that's going to really struggle to do it at AFL level as a youngster. I think he's a real guy who could produce some solid numbers. Tex Walker, a bit of doubt about him. I think Fogarty could have done enough to just put himself in the line for the best 22 regardless, but again, that'll be something we've just got to monitor when those first teams come out. Crouch, Laird, Sloan, Gibbs did what they do, found plenty of the ball. Lockie Murphy, kick a goal, 12 touches from touch over half the game. He's at, bargain basement, sort of 102k. I couldn't see him getting a game, but I know a few teams do have him sitting on the bench, but I doubt that he'd play. And Cam Ellis-Yeoman, I've mentioned him before, 263k, 19 touches, plenty of clearances, 14 of those touches were contested. I'm not going to pick him because he does have concern about his body and even slight job security, but I'll tell you what, if we get to the first 5 or 6 rounds and he's averaging in the 90s and flying, I mean, don't be surprised. I really think he's a guy who, if he can get out there, can score very good numbers. So he's an absolute tempter. I think it's just going to be far too risky, and the way my structure has worked out over the last week or so with trying to get a bit more depth through the forward line, I just probably don't see him finding his way into my side. But I tell you what, I think he'll definitely be one I snatch up late in the SuperCoach draft. Hopefully none of my mates are listening to this and snap him up before me. But anyway, I probably shouldn't have given that one away. Nonetheless, we'll move on to Hawthorn and Carlton. The Blues getting the job done by 5 points. And Jaeger O'Meara, 23 touches. Plenty of those contested, as we know. 8 tackles. Only went at 52% disposal efficiency, but sometimes that can happen when you're an inside mid. I think he's done enough. I think if you like him, as I've said previously, he's not for me. I'm a bit concerned about that body for sure. I think he's the sort of guy who could quite easily get rested on just simply a premeditated rest for a bloke like him. But I think if you were a fan, he's probably done enough to get you on board. So he was fairly impressive. And James Sicily, 20 touches, just 2 contested. He relies heavily on intercepting the ball and taking big marks and hitting up targets by foot. But I think he's a real interesting selection, and I'd be lying if I said he hasn't floated in and out of my side over the last 4 or 5 days, because I've been looking at probably that D4 spot and that F5 spot, just how I feel that out. And he's certainly been in both at times. But what concerns me most is he's just susceptible to being sucked in. I'm not sure he's matured fully to be a premium yet. I think he's going to have some games that are outstanding, but equally, particularly if sides cotton on and want to play someone as a defensive-minded player on him, he can quite easily get sucked in and give away free kicks, and he is a bit of a hothead, and it just worries me because I just don't think we can afford him to be giving away 2-3 free kicks and 50-metre penalties. They kill you. So I suppose while he's on the cheaper side of things, what is he, 402 from memory? I still think if you're selecting him, he's a guy you're selecting to keep for the whole season. That's obvious. And whether he's ready to do that, well, maybe the jury's out. As we know, unbelievable back end of the season. I think the final 10 games, he averaged something like, was it 100? I think, I want to say maybe something like that. But whatever the number was, I had it in my player profile. He did throw in that 25 against the Blues where Jed Lamb had him pulling his hair out. And I think if teams decide to do that, or just ruffle him up, get stuck into him, I think he can still get sucked in. And that worries me when you're entrusting a bloke with 400k. That is a little bit of a concern and just something that sways me off him ever so slightly. In terms of the Blues, well, Simpson and Cripps were very solid and did what they do. Paddy Dow, probably a bit like Davies Uniacke. we got to pay a little bit extra for these top draft picks, and you want to have a little bit of confidence in what they're doing. Dow was pretty handy that first JLT, but just the 8 touches, 25% disposal efficiency, and I think you've probably got to look elsewhere. There's plenty of other options, and I think there's guys that can do the job at a similar price tag and even less. And there's probably just a few other guys who maybe look a little bit more comfortable at this stage. That's not to say Dow hasn't looked comfortable, but I probably feel there's perhaps better options out there. And, you know, Brayshaw is one. There's others in there. Even at your 123k, Tim Kelly sort of deal, there are options through our midfield. So I think you could probably save yourself 70k there potentially, and that can always be helpful around the ground too. Cam O'Shea, well, he was really handy and could be in line for a round 1 spot. Had the 10 touches from just 24% time on ground, 4 tackles and a few rebound 50s. And along with Norton, along with Caulfield, along with Sammy Murray, you know, he will be a guy that will be in a lot of people's back line, probably on the field, I dare say. And Matt Kennedy, probably just a bit of a draft sleeper as well. I think he's in for a really handy season. He's too awkward to pick in Classic, but 20 touches, 11 contested. He's at 356k, 5 clearances. I've really enjoyed seeing him fit into that Carlton midfield, and sometimes players come to other clubs and they just seem to fit in, and he's really done that for mine. I've enjoyed his work, and I think, while we won't be looking at it Classic, I just thought, you know, throw his name in there because he could be a handy selection just through your draft league, which probably a lot of people have them coming up or have just been. So, food for thought. Geelong and Essendon, obviously I headed along to this game. The Cats couldn't quite hold on, but it certainly was an entertaining match. The Bombers getting the job done by 4 points there. And look, Mitch Duncan off the top, 38 touches, wasn't he outstanding? And he should certainly be in the conversation among Dangerfield, Ablett and Selwood. He shouldn't be just left out of that chat because he is elite. He was fantastic again, a beautiful ball user. But Paddy Dangerfield was the big talking point, wasn't he? That hamstring had us all concerned. There was talk of some sort of leg injury, some sort of maybe a groin, or what's he done to his ankle, or this and that. You hear plenty of things at the game, but he was flying too. 12 touches, 8 contested, 3 clearances, just 18% time on the ground. But it looks like his round 1 appearance might be in some serious doubt. The scans will come through, so we probably can't just forecast too much. He'll have scans probably tomorrow, maybe the day after. We'll hear about him midway through the week, I'm sure. But clearly if he misses, then he can't be picked. But even if he is looking like he'll play, it's got to be a huge risk now. It's got to be a huge risk. You guys know my thoughts. He's so expensive. If you're picking him at that price, you want to be safe in the knowledge that he is primed, ready to just go bang with a 150. You don't want to be thinking, oh, he's probably not cherry ripe. He's still sort of nursing it. He's not 100% fit, but he's good enough to play. I think if you're paying that amount of coin, you want to have no doubt in the mind that he can be producing his very best football from the first bounce. So that's something that there's got to be doubt about now, because whether he's there round 1 or not, we know there's been a little bit of a niggle, and it's a lot of coin to pay for a guy who's, you know, probably just going to be fresh off that hammy. I think whether it's minor or serious, he's definitely, if he plays, it'll be touch and go, and that concerns me. But look, I think a lot of people, if he's named, are just simply going to back him in. But personally, I'd be a little bit worried. Joel Selwood had the 35 touches, 17 contested, 12 clearances. Outstanding stuff, and that's what he can do. I mean, he probably doesn't break away from as many packs now, and his foot skills aren't up there with the very best, but gee, he can win the inside ball as good as any. And look, Tim Kelly looked really assured, as he has throughout the pre-season, and I think he's a guy that's going to slot into the Cats lineup very easily, and for round 1. Over the Bombers, Devon Smith, 22 touches, 8 contested, 4 clearances. I was really impressed with what I saw. Obviously, he hasn't been in my side throughout the pre-season. Did have the 7 clangers, but 5 of those were free kicks against, and there was something like 45 free kicks went to the Cats, so I'm not sure what was going on there, but I think we can safely say that while he had 7 clangers, it wasn't though he butchered the ball. He's a guy that I've got to consider now. I was really impressed with what I saw, and off the back of me looking for a bit of F5 depth, so that he, Michael Walters, James Sicily, they're all guys that I'm sort of tossing and turning about. So he's someone I'm definitely looking at. Darcy Parish, 419k. He's a mid-forward, 20 touches, 11 contested, 5 clearances. Looks really good. I think he's going to be a guy that we talk about for a number of years. Not sure this year will be the one that we see him absolutely explode. There'll definitely be an increase in his numbers, but you know, he's probably in that mix. Like I was talking with Akers, he's just another name to put on the list and someone to think about. And Andy McGrath, 24 touches, 17 of those were handballs, but with that came a really nice disposal efficiency of 92, and I really do like his prospects. I probably wouldn't be picking him, and how Marty Gleason's injury affects where he lines up is probably something else we've got to think about. But look, I think he is looking the goods, and we know how talented he is. He'll get a bit more midfield time, and he's lovely with ball in hand, so he's a guy that will definitely feature in our sides throughout the years to come. Moving on to Brisbane and Gold Coast. Gold Coast getting the win by 7 points in what was a pretty scrappy affair in tough conditions. Pierce Hanley was probably the talking point here. 15 touches, just a 60% time on ground because he went off with a shoulder injury, and I'm not exactly sure the extent of it. Shoulders, you know, you can be out for a while, or you can sometimes just, you know, get it back in there and not be too bad, just be a bit sore, strap it up sort of deal. So something we're going to have to wait and see. But as you guys know, I've probably gone off him a little bit. I think he's playing more of that bloke who's charging out of the back line, and I really wanted to see midfield time from Hanley. Lockie Weller, 394k, so he's awkward as hell, but he did have the 22 touches, 10 contested. I know a few people wanted me to do a player profile on him. I don't think I'll get round to doing one, but he's a guy that, yeah, I think he'll have a pretty handy season. I think he'll be one of that sort of new brigade who goes through the midfield for the Suns. I don't think we could pick him, but he falls in that category of a bit of a draft guy that we might want to look at deep into the draft. And a few names that are youngsters on the rise, and we know there's a few midfield spots open for Gold Coast, and I think Jack Bowers and Will Brodie will take up a couple of those. Both had 18 touches, 12 and 10 contested possessions respectively. Their disposal efficiency probably wasn't what they wanted, 38 for the both of them, but you know, I'm pretty sure it was fairly wet. I didn't see too much of it, but I know the conditions were tough, and I think they're hard in and under guys, highly rated players. I think we could see them get a fair bit of opportunity throughout this season. And Nick Holman, you know, fantastic, 13 touches, 11 contested, 5 tackles. He was really good. Looks set for a round 1 appearance. Moving on to Brisbane, Stephen Martin, as I sort of alluded to in talking about Grundy, he had 18 touches, 10 contested, 31 hit-outs, and the 6 clearances. And he's had a really good JLT campaign and put himself on the radar. I think we know what we're going to get from him. He's going to be a real workman-like sort of player. Follow-up work is elite, gets plenty of clearances and tackles. So he's someone that's certainly one to consider. Dane Zelko, what's he in? About 6% of sides now. Could be a handy point of difference because I think he can go big, as we know. 33 touches, 17 contested. Again, was one to sort of suffer disposal efficiency-wise, but nonetheless, I think if you're looking for a slightly different premium that maybe isn't your usual suspects, and he's one we've got to take a look at. Tom Bell did the player profile on him, said if we see some good signs from him, he must be considered. And he must be considered because he had 19 touches, 13 contested, 9 tackles and 9 clearances. That's big. Those are some big numbers. Absolutely has got to be considered. I've sort of played around. I've seen my side with him in it. I've seen him without it. I'm not set on anything yet, but he's one that we must consider. If you want to add depth to your forward line but save 200k, i.e. if you don't want to have a premium sitting at F5, well, I think Tom Bell is the clear standout selection. How Dane Beams returning affects him, we'll wait and see. But he's such a strong body through the engine room, and I think he's just someone that we're going to see play through there. Clearly, Beams and Zorko will be the main men in there, but Tom Bell looks like he's a real battering ram, contested beast, and if he can stay fit, well, he's definitely going to see his fair share of centre bounces and stoppage work. Cam Rayner, 13 touches, 10 tackles, really good stuff from the young gun. Again, I'm not sure I'll be starting him. In fact, I'm pretty confident I won't be, but he is a guy that is going to play some great footy throughout the season, and he's going to show at certain stages exactly why he was the number 1 pick. I think Brisbane's midfield is fairly strong, so I don't see him getting too many, sort of runs through there regularly. I think a few guys I've already mentioned, along with the likes of Berry and Robinson and McCluggage, a few of those types will see plenty of time in there. So Probably more your half-forward flank style, but nonetheless, he's a very talented player. As I said, Berry McCluggage, love what they're doing. Keep them on a short list for some later picks in your draft. Alan Christensen, 12 touches, no clearances from 75% time on the ground. And I think we've got to put a line through him, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, it's disappointing because he looked like an absolute lock in our forward line at, 267k. But probably Tom Bell has emerged as the man who looks the best fit for that sort of price range. Christensen's clearly going to just play more of a forward line role and be a rotate through the midfield. So I think we really, or at least I did, wanted to see him play probably more of a 50-50 split or even become more of a midfielder, but that doesn't seem to be the case. And I just wanted some midfield minutes. That's what I really wanted to see, and I've been a little concerned by that. So if you guys watched my team update video the other week, he was a man who exited my side. And lastly, Fremantle versus West Coast. I think the Eagles are in for a tough season. The Dockers smashed them by 62 points. They're struggling. You know, we know Prudis is gone, Mitchell's gone, Kennedy's out for a couple, Nick Nat's struggling. It's going to be tough for the Eagles, I think. We'll start with Fremantle, and Lachie Neale was dominant, 36 touches, 13 contested, 3 goals, 8 clearances. He has a happy knack of when he goes big, just chiming in with a few goals and really has a high ceiling. He's at 599k and just 3% of sides. And a bit like Zorko, if you want a point of difference, then he's got to be a guy that is a big contender for that sort of a role. Nat 5, 26 touches, 14 contested. He's a lock, as we know. Andrew Brayshaw had the 19 touches, 10 contested, 4 clearances. Really like what he did. You got to pay a little bit for him in terms of a guy playing his first season, but you know that's what you get when you're buying a first-round pick and a high one at that. But he looks like he'll get some real opportunity from Ross Lyon. Clearly, we need to await how we see that Dockers best 22 roll out in round 1, but he looks really good. Really attended a lot of centre bounces, and I like the look of him. Bailey Banfield, a bit more of a mature age player. I think he's 20 years old, but he looks like he'll slot into the Dockers side as well. He had 18 touches, kicked a goal, 7 contested possessions, so he looks like a likely type 2. Now, Michael Walters, I was really on Walters' watch, that's for sure. I wanted to see how he went. Statistically, it was okay, but I didn't love what I saw. I didn't see enough time around the stoppage as I would have liked. Obviously, I pumped him up in that player profile. I wanted to see some real midfield stuff from him, and I didn't quite see it. We saw a bit of it, but it's tough to explain, and I'd love to have some Champion Data's numbers behind it, but I felt like he played a bit more half-forward, was more of a target inside 50 than he was in a centre-bounce stoppage. I'm just not absolutely sold now. I think he comes in that mould of sort of tossing up between whether it's a Devon Smith who's a little bit cheaper. So, look, again, that'll be one who I'm sort of toing and froing with at the moment because I am a big Walters fan. All I needed was a good game. Not even a good game, like I said earlier. Just seeing him in around that stoppage, get your 3 or 4 clearances, be in that sort of mould, and that'd be enough. But I probably didn't see it. It looked to me like it was a bit more of a forward pocket, half-forward flank style of a setup. So, again, you never know. Is Ross Lyon tinkering with certain things? Is he giving someone like Brayshaw just the opportunity? Come round 1, no, maybe Walters will play almost pure midfield. It's a real guessing game, and that's half of it, isn't it? Sometimes you just got to back in your gut. Sometimes you got to take a risk. We'll wait and see what I do there. As for the Eagles, Liam Duggan was probably a standout, 24 touches, 5 rebound 50s. He's at 356k in the back line. I think he'll be a real improver. I don't think it'll be enough to select him, but I really like what he does. Elliot Yeo, 18 touches, struggled disposing it, just a 39% disposal efficiency. Not sure. I've been back and forth with him. I don't know. I think at times he'll have some really good games, but probably my concern now is less with him. I think he'll get plenty of midfield time, but big concern just about the Eagles. I think with minimal ruck stocks, they're going to struggle this year, I think. Will Yeo just have games like we saw over the weekend where the West Coast just gets smashed, and it's tough to be any good when your side gets thumped. Only the very best players can shine when your team's having a tough day, and I just sometimes wonder whether West Coast midfield will come off second best more often than not. And while that might only see Yo's numbers go from him averaging 99 to 92, it'll still be okay. But I'd rather see West Coast be a bit more competitive and see them have a bit more of a hit out and come out on top a little bit more around the ball. They just got thumped. So that's something to think about, is how much will West Coast fortunes affect Yo? It's something I've just been wondering, whether if they just get thumped around the ball, sometimes that's out of your hands. But we'll have to wait and see. Mark Hutchings is a guy who, again, a bit of a draft sleeper. I wouldn't be surprised to see his numbers go all right as they look for a few hard bodies around the midfield. Probably not for Classic, or definitely not for Classic, but food for thought. And Liam Ryan had the 13 touches. He looks like he'll line up round one. Someone in our forward line that unsure how he'll score, but if he can play, that'll be great. And Willie Rioli had the injury. Not sure on the extent of that. We'll find out throughout the week. But if he is fit, you'd say it's likely he'll debut. If he's not, then he might be a guy we can downgrade to throughout the season. But gee whiz, I'm going to grab a glass of water, I think. There's a few names there, a few guys to talk about, and there's plenty to talk about over the next week or so. As we count down, there's still, what is it, 10, 11, 12 days? I can't even remember until round one, but it's catching up pretty soon. It's getting close. So there's plenty of guys that we've got to talk about. And now's the time where you got to tinker around, and soon enough we've got to stop tinkering, because we're going to have to set on what exactly we want to have in those positions. And I think sometimes throughout the pre-season it's easy to sort of chop and change, and I'll put this guy here, see how this works, where now we've got to make the big calls. We've got to go, well, am I going with this guy or not? Because it's getting close to lockout time and I've got to make a 100% choice, so that can get tough. But hopefully you guys have tuned in for the entirety of this video, and hopefully it's given you something to think about, and hopefully a few names that haven't crossed your mind yet, and hopefully maybe giving you a bit of insight on how I'm thinking with my team, and as well as a few guys who you might be thinking about in your own mind for your team. So hopefully that has helped. I'll be back soon with plenty of SuperCoach stuff, player profiles, a bit more insight into those exact positions. We've got everything we need to see now. I reckon I might line up a few guys like I was talking about F5. There's a few guys in that discussion. Who are they? How do I rank them? Bit of player comparison stuff and a few things like that. So keep commenting away, subscribing away, liking the videos. That'll be fantastic. And I'll be back soon. Cheers.